Hello, my name is Martin Donahue, and this is Prescription for Justice. We're in conversation with Dr. Matthew Anderson, a family medicine doctor from the Bronx, who's also at Montefiore and teaches in the social medicine program, is the editor and founder of the journal Social Medicine, which can be read both in English and in Spanish. He has worked in Central America. He is currently translating a work from German into English about reform-minded doctors at the beginning of the 20th century in Germany. He is a polyglot, a polymath, and knows an awful lot of history and has worked with ICE detainees, has visited the wall at the border, and is going to share his thoughts and experiences with us. Just a few brief statistics for background. Worldwide, there are 68 million migrants. Of these, 40 million are internally displaced persons, and another 18 million are refugees, and half of these are children. In the United States, once again, there are 25 million non-citizens and 11 to 12 million undocumented immigrants. Most of these have been here for more than 10 years. There are quite a number of children, and among the undocumented immigrants, 40% of the agricultural workforce is made up of those individuals, 20% of the meat processing industry, and 20% of those who work in food service are undocumented immigrants. They pay taxes, both income taxes, payroll taxes, state taxes, sales taxes, and they're not eligible for any of the benefits that those of us who are documented and have citizenship are able to earn. And Matt, when we stopped last time, we were talking about the situation in Guatemala, but we want to step back a little bit in terms of what's driving immigration. And there's a whole history behind this. And you used a term that I wasn't familiar with, and a phrase, and that's "I'm here because you're there." Can you explain to me what that means?
So it's a we. We are here because you were there, okay. Which is basically a way of expressing the fact that colonialism is alive and well in the world as a whole, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, and this is a way of expressing the reality that we all live in one global world. We don't live in small nation states, and that, as Chancellor Merkel said, I guess last week when she spoke at Harvard, it's better to build bridges rather than to build walls. And so that's really captures, I think, that statement of we're here because you were there, captures the sense in which large American corporations have been able to extract a lot from countries like Guatemala. There are significant mining interests, particularly in El Salvador. There's a lot of free labor or very, very cheap labor that comes out of Guatemala. They keep Broadway is full of flowers that were grown in Guatemala. And those countries have been ones that have been very, very much exploited. And maybe it's time for us to look at alternative models of society that would be more beneficial to them.
And that's been a practice with corporations over many decades, is to close down factories in the United States, send those jobs abroad where workers can be hired for less money to work under very limited occupational safety and health standards, often in very hazardous conditions, and then the products are basically just shipped back to us. We certainly have extracted billions from other countries over the years to benefit our lifestyle here. Tell us a little bit about the Guatemala story. Take us back to the 1950s.
Right. So, well, actually, right after World War II, Guatemala was caught up in the same sort of, this is the time of democracy, and they elected a president who was a poet. Probably a bad idea, but he remained president until about the end of the 50s, when Arbenz, who was a colonel in the military, sort of looked at the way Guatemala was being exploited by the United Fruit Company and said, this is totally ridiculous. Just to give you one example, the United Fruit Company owned basically all the good banana lands and really didn't pay anything at all in taxes. So Arbenz demanded that they pay taxes, and when they wouldn't, he expropriated them. And this is now 1957. The Dulleses are running the State Department, and they're highly anti-communist. And basically what they do is the United States funds and equips a group of people who basically start a civil war at the end of the 1950s, which really never ended. Although formally its ending was in the 1990s. But massive amount of people were killed in the course of that civil war. There's a wonderful John Sayles movie called Hombres Armados, Armed Men, that sort of captures some of that experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a wonderful filmmaker Sayles is. And it's true of these extractive industries that often what happens is U.S. or other Western-based corporations will move in, extract the diamonds, the gold, the other precious metals or minerals, and once they've gotten them all, basically leave a toxic mess for the local government to clean up. And the situation around these camps is one where there's rampant prostitution, violations of human rights and women's rights, the subjugation of women. And for those who are interested in exploring that topic further, if you go to the Gold, Diamonds, and Flowers page of the Public Health and Social Justice website, there are some articles and open access slideshows where you can explore those issues in detail. I know Guatemala has also been facing the consequences of global warming, which has had an impact on their local agriculture, leading to famine. And it's interesting because our Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who works basically for a government that doesn't acknowledge the existence nor the horrendous consequences that are happening and the even worse consequences that will happen of climate change. And what he said when asked about the effect of climate change on the movements of people and how it would cause starvation, his quote from the last week was, well, societies reorganize. We move to different places. And indeed, that's what many of these individuals are doing by coming here. You've been to the wall.
I've been to?
To the wall.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Now, this is not a complete wall. It doesn't cover the whole southern border. We, of course, have 6,000 troops down there as part of a military emergency to stop rampaging pregnant women and their 4-year-old children from invading the country and taking over reservations at our finest restaurants, I'm sure, and all of our white-collar jobs. But what is it like to actually be at the wall?
So in 2013, I have an uncle who lives in Tucson. He was a professor at the university. And in 2013, we decided we'd go visit him. I'd never been to Tucson. I went with my sons. And we spent the night at the John Wayne Hotel that looked like it came out of a casting set in Hollywood, and drove down the next day to the wall. And we were driving on dirt roads. And after about a half an hour, we kind of got to a promontory. And my uncle said, stop the car, you can see the wall. And I looked, I didn't see any wall. But then I realized that there was a line way off in the distance. It was sort of following the hills, a black line. And he said, that's the wall. So we drove down a little bit closer to the wall. We took a right turn that was going west to the town of Nogales. And there's nothing there. This is all desert, a lot of dust. And all of a sudden, a woman comes running out right in front of the car. Just zoom like that. And I was like terrified because I thought I was going to kill her, but I didn't. And so she ran off north. She's got like 30 miles of desert in front of her. That's it. And we drove on a little bit further, and there were the ICE people sitting in their big Ford sedan with the air conditioner on. The whole thing was covered with dust. They couldn't see anything. And we drive on a little bit further, and a man comes running across right in front of the car. I have to assume that they were doing that to hide. My uncle said to me, well, this just proves the old adage that if you show me a 10-foot wall, I'll show you a man with an 11-foot ladder.
Right. And this is a very arduous journey that they've taken, many of these individuals, going over 1,000 miles just to get to the border. And even if they get in, that's the beginning of yet another journey. It's important to remember that between 2002 and 2018, 6,000 dead bodies of Latinos were recovered in the border area. That's a death toll that's greater than 9/11 plus Hurricane Katrina combined. And I'll bet you most Americans are not aware of that. And sad to say, there's an individual currently on trial in Arizona for his work as part of a group for putting water bottles out in jugs for the undocumented so that they won't die of dehydration out in the desert, which is a very unpleasant way to die. And in fact, the ICE agents, my understanding is they go and they pick up those water bottles and they just pour the water out.
Or put a hole in the bottle.
Mm-hmm. Right, so that it can't be used again. Exactly.
Yeah. This is just incredibly horrible, inhumane treatment of people. When I speak about this, sometimes I mention the fact that if they can make it across the border, you know that they're healthy, they're desperate for work, and that as soon as they can find a job and get some money, the folks at home are under even more desperate circumstances than they are.
Right.
Not people who've come to live off the fat of the land.
Right. And we haven't mentioned now the count is about 14,000 families being held in what is essentially indefinite detention, and about 2,500 children who've been separated from their parents. In at least 400 cases, the parents themselves have been deported, and the odds of hooking those children up with their parents decrease with every day that they're held in custody. And the Trump administration just cut off funding through ICE for legal representation, recreation, and English language classes for these kids. So basically, many of them are kept, indeed, if you've seen the pictures, they're being kept in what are functionally cages. And this has been called by the president of the American Association of Pediatrics child abuse. It's basically governmental child abuse, and something that we, as citizens of what is, in theory, a free nation, a multicultural nation, should not be tolerating in our government. Matt, many of these institutions where the undocumented are kept are run by private industry,
yes,
and are thus not always subject to certain rules and regulations. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how the for-profit motive plays out?
I'm not sure that the rules are any different with the for-profit as opposed to the governmentally sanctioned, or the ones that are done with public monies. We do know that the quality of the medical care people receive is very poor, and it's completely opaque. I mean, we don't really have any good statistics on any kind of mortality or morbidity data coming out of those facilities. It's just one of the privileges that they enjoy as a private company.
Yeah. And private companies have also taken over not only the prisons themselves, but healthcare in prisons for U.S. citizens, and have been under investigation and involved in court cases in a number of states in the United States. The largest facility in the country now is Homestead in Florida. That's run by Comprehensive Health Services. They're a for-profit company. The average cost to detain a child there is about $775 per day. That's 3 times what the smaller ICE facilities around the country are charging, including those that are run directly by the federal government. So there's a lot of money to be had in detention, and a lot of money to be had in the detention of the undocumented, including undocumented children. Matt, you, I know, have some background too in how slavery has fit into all this. Maybe you want to address how really the co-optation of the other who have come to the United States has basically built this country. and how we have treated those who are considered outsiders, excluding, of course, the white European settlers from the non-excrement hole countries, as our current sociopathic narcissist in chief referred to them.
Well, I mean, I think this is a very fascinating part of American history, which is that, you had a group of people who came over as indentured servants who eventually got their freedom. You had African American slaves, some of whom were able to purchase their own freedom. And you had Indians who were basically living under their own rules. And there's been a lot of research about what that kind of very potent mixture meant, because all those three groups had reasons not to like the European colonists. And there seems to be a series of events that take place in the South whereby the white Europeans differentiate themselves from either the Africans or the Indians. Although there were apparently many Europeans who went and joined the Indian tribes. But this sort of situation that the planters were anxious not to have these three groups cooperate led to a series of laws that got passed in court cases that basically began to define what was going to be the racial hierarchy here in the United States. And now, of course, it's really sort of in our genetic code, just to look at people and immediately classify what race they're in, or to treat them differently because of their race. And it's completely invisible, and yet everybody knows it's there.
Right. And I think it's quite true in the literal Latin sense of the word that we decimated the Native American population through disease, through forced marches, wars, trying to anglicize their children and rob them of their culture, very much like what happened in Australia. And I'm half Australian, so that history is important and relevant to me. And there were various waves of immigrants coming to the United States, all of whom were discriminated against. The 1882 Chinese Exclusion Acts, the Mexican repatriation, as it was called, in the late 1920s, early 1930s, when perhaps as many as 1.8 million Mexicans were deported. Waves of hatred and violence against Italian and Irish immigrants. But it's important that we call this out for what it is. It's racism, plain and simple. And the language around immigration is the language that uses the dog whistle words of racism. And that language is designed to incite fear in the hearts of Americans, and it's designed to basically create conflict between, unfortunately, two groups of have-nots. Those that are already marginalized and living day to day in poor parts of the country where access to health care is limited, given our lack of a single payer system, where they are working in dead-end jobs with limited to no benefits or retirement money. And rather than have them turn their anger against the system as it exists in what is functionally a corporate plutocracy that runs this country, and a racist one at that, to turn their anger against the others. And so that's why we see, for instance, militias at the border. I don't know if you ran into any of these private militias that are detaining people at the border or not.
No, we didn't run into any of them.
Yeah.
But they were there.
They are there. And the whole idea of them taking American jobs is rather ridiculous. Just look at Trump's properties. Between 2016 and 2017, there were 144 seasonal jobs advertised and filled at Trump properties. Out of those 144 seasonal jobs, 143 were filled through H-2B visas by foreign workers who are coming temporarily to the United States. Only one was filled by an American. So there's also been this creation of an amazing fear around gangs. and terrorists. If you look at terrorist acts that have happened in the United States since 9/11, there have been 95 fatalities by foreign terrorists, caused by foreign terrorists on American soil. 2/3 of those were carried out by young, white, so-called Christian males from hate groups. Your odds of dying from a refugee in the United States who is or becomes a terrorist are minuscule. You are 29 times more likely to be hit by an asteroid, 260 more times more likely to be killed by lightning, and 129,000 times more likely to be killed by the day-to-day gun violence that savages this country. So that is a very, very, very sadly misplaced fear when there are so many other ways to die. And we're doing a little bit about asteroids through NASA and trying to intercept those because, of course, they could wipe us out like the dinosaurs. But 129,000 times more likely to die from a school or Costco shooting anywhere is really, really a little bit ridiculous. Matt?
So,
yeah, please.
So if I could take something that's been very much concerning to us in the Bronx, we have really bad maternal mortality problems in the Bronx. And the Bronx, the health districts in the Bronx are just defunded. And here's just here is a perfect example of something that we ought to be paying a lot of attention to. But the death of black women, pregnant black women, just seems to be an invisible problem. It's crushing. It
is crushing. So before I wrap up and we consider what we and our viewers can do, does foreign aid make a difference here? Could we be turning around these countries? I mean, wouldn't the goal realistically to be to create neighbors who are more well off, who provide stability and peace in our region, and whose citizens may want to come here, but frankly, may want to stay with their families? I mean, many have calculated the economic consequences of open borders and have calculated that for the United States as well as for many European countries, in fact, that would be a multi-billion-dollar boon or cause an massive increase in our GDP. But what can and actually does foreign aid do?
So I'm really very skeptical about foreign aid. I lived for 6 years in Haiti, and it just was abundantly clear that all the U.S. foreign aid pouring into Haiti was going to the think tanks in Washington, D.C. I don't want to be an entirely nihilist about this, but I think that this has to be done in a very careful way, and not in a way that just enriches the folks here in the United States. I don't know. I think there have been, in the Bronx even, we've seen situations where people probably did good things. The Chavez government actually funded heating oil for areas in the Bronx that didn't have heat during the winter. I think they were waving their finger at someone. But this is a very difficult, I think it's a very difficult, and I certainly don't think that Americans are the best placed people to undertake these kind of projects.
Right, and much foreign aid is frankly military aid, and even that aid which is not military goes to enrich the pockets of U.S. and other multinational corporations who get the contracts to build a dam or even something even more beneficial like a school, for instance. In many ways, our foreign aid is frankly designed to keep the Central American countries as banana republics, essentially. Go ahead.
I was going to say, there's an enormous amount of drugs that are going through Guatemala every day. It just happens to be, the Petén Forest just happens to be sort of midway between Colombia and Miami. So it's a good place to refuel. There's a lot of Guatemalan military there. There's a lot of DEA agents there. I don't think they have made no impact on what's really going on.
Mm-hmm. So what, in our 1 minute that we have remaining, what can our viewers do?
Well, I suspect that in most communities, there are people who are concerned about the issue of immigrants coming to the United States. And we had a strong sanctuary movement here during the first wave of Central America civil wars. I know that in New York City, we've been trying to construct a new sanctuary movement, sort of trying to replicate the stuff that was going on here in the 1980s.
Mm-hmm. And I know one thing I do at the bedside with my patients, those that speak Spanish, and because of my limited language proficiency in Spanish, I use a translator service. But one of the first things I say to them is, I want you to know that it does not matter to me, for purposes of your medical care or otherwise, whether you are here and documented or undocumented, that my job, my oath as a physician, is to take care of your health and to do everything I can to optimize your health now and in the future. And I think that is an important thing practitioners can do to put their patients at ease, because there is a long history in the United States and in many other countries of physicians being co-opted by the government as agents of the state. And that keeps people away from much needed health care. And frankly, that's a human rights abuse that affects them. But even if we want to just think selfishly about our own health, that's going to affect all of us. If you think about things like people with infectious diseases like TB and syphilis going underground and so on. So
measles.
And measles, of course. And so Matt, we are living through a really dark period now in the United States. I don't think that everyone is quite aware of how, like lobsters in a pot, democracy is slowly being boiled to death. And I thank you for coming on the show. I thank you for all the amazing work that you do. I ask people to please go to the Social Medicine website, look at past issues of Social Medicine, the journal. You'll find a wealth of information there. Look for Matt's book when it comes out. I'm sure there'll be information on the website there. And get involved with others in your community. And at the most human level, remember, we're all people. We all have a very limited fraction of an instant in geological time together on this planet. And what do we want our legacy to be? How do we want to teach our kids about how to treat people with respect and kindness? Everything else fades away. When you dissect somebody, there's no color of their skin inside. Everybody has the same organs inside. We all share the same hopes and dreams. And Matt, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Thank you to our viewers. And my name is Martin Donahoe. This has been Prescription for Justice. If you missed the first episode with Matt, I encourage you to watch that. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.